Welcome to Toffee TV. Delighted to say I am joined by Joe Thomas from the Liverpool Echo in the studio. Looking forward to the new season. Joe, how are you?
Yeah, not too bad, Jason. Yeah, I am looking forward to new season, to be honest. I think, the summers always seem incredibly short, don't it? Especially with Everton, because they just seem to be a club that just doesn't do a sustained period without any news. But that being said, I think I'm looking forward to this. I feel refreshed enough to go again, I think. Which I don't think I would have felt like that the back end of May. If you told me the back end of May that I'd be looking forward to the new season come this point, I think I'd have been surprised. But I am, I think.
Yeah, it has felt like an incredibly short amount of time. Hasn't it? It was only just over 8 weeks ago since obviously the Bournemouth game and staying up. And so how do you feel Everton have come through that period of time so far? Obviously, we've still got a few weeks left of the transfer window. We'll start with the transfers. Obviously, Ashley Young is through the door. We've got Chimiti ready to come in as well. So how are you feeling in the general context of obviously players and the business we're trying to do?
I think I'm pleased with the players that have been brought in so far.
Obviously Dan Juma as well.
Dan Juma, of course. I think Ashley Young is an astute signing. Let's be honest. At the end of the day, obviously he's a 38-year-old player with a lot of minutes in his legs and things like that. And I can understand why, when the deal was first mooted, there were a few elements of the fan base that were perhaps a little bit concerned over what it might say about the overall strategy for the summer. But I think that he's a player that brings, I think he's a good personality for a start, and I think that this is a squad that's lost a lot of strong personalities and professionalism in the players that have departed. I think in the games that we've seen him already, he brings an intelligence, a footballing intelligence onto the pitch, which has been missing from too many positions for too long. So I think that whilst obviously he's not a long-term signing, in the short term, bearing in mind that you're in a position where only 8 weeks ago for that Bournemouth game, one of the biggest games in Everton's modern history, possibly one of the biggest games in its history, full stop, you're in a situation where Everton can't play a recognised fullback. Well, Ashley Young is someone who comes in and he addresses that problem. He does so cheaply, and he does so with a touch of class. Dan Juma is a good signing, I think. We know that he is a player who obviously he took Villarreal to a Champions League semi-final, and it was his goals that were a big part of getting them there. So he does have that pedigree. It's clear that he's had a few difficult seasons since then, but hopefully that means that he's got the hunger to kind of revitalise his career. And I think he has some of the attributes there that this squad desperately needs. I like the pragmatism around it. I think if this was a different era of Everton might be in a situation where 6 months after what happened in January, they could go, you know what, we're not touching that. Yeah. Let's be perfectly honest, for a whole host of reasons, Everton aren't in that position this summer. And I like the fact that they haven't let what happened in January stop them from doing what is essentially, I think, is a good piece of business this summer. And then for Chimiti, obviously he hasn't signed yet, but I mean, it's looking it's in a very advanced stages now, and it would be a surprise, not quite of the Dan Juma scale, but if it didn't get done now, I think we'd be very surprised from everything that likes of both of ourselves will be hearing, and other people as well. I like the thinking of it. I think, obviously he's a young lad. I like the idea of that persistence with the Anana approach to a circumstance where you buy someone who's quite young, quite inexperienced, but with a potentially high ceiling that you might be able to develop. What I like about the Chimiti deal is he's got similar attributes to some extent of Dominic Calvert-Lewin. And I think the problem that Everton had at this stage, or perhaps a little bit later in the transfer window last summer, was that once Dominic Calvert-Lewin got injured, they appeared to go almost counterintuitively, and they went for Neil Maupay, who's a player which has good attributes. I can understand why they might think he might have worked, but they didn't seem to have a plan around him and what he would do and how they would play to his strengths. And I think that's been unfortunate for the club and for him personally. And it's still the case now. But with Chimiti, what they're seeming to be doing is, albeit it'll be questionable how much of an impact he can have immediately, they're bringing in somebody that, if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't available, might be able to do a similar kind of job. And the way that Dominic Calvert-Lewin is so important to Everton's system and the way they play, Everton only have a plan A. I think we saw that very clearly at the end of last season. Yeah. They only have one way of effectively playing, and that is with somebody like Dominic Calvert-Lewin up top. So if Dominic Calvert-Lewin isn't on the pitch, and obviously things are looking quite good on that front at the moment, almost it's less important whether how developed that player who the replacement is, so long as he can do some of the same jobs and bring the best out of the players around him. If Chimiti doesn't come in and hit 10 goals in 20 games, that doesn't have to be the end of the world, because what he might do is just by occupying defenders in the same way, just by winning balls on the halfway line, just by running the odd channel, or helping the ball to stick up top, what he might do is he might bring in the likes of Dwight McNeil when he's fit, Alex Iwobi, bring those players in around him, so that if Chimiti can't get the goals that Dominic Calvert-Lewin wasn't scoring last season, then perhaps he might at least help the likes of McNeil, Iwobi, and those around and get, turn from 3 or 4 goals a season to 7 or 8 goals a season, and all of a sudden the whole standard just increases. Yeah,
I mean, what we've seen so far, obviously with the squad as well, is he would get opportunities as well, whether it be off the bench or to start games, with obviously Dominic Calvert-Lewin's persistent injuries. And also, I think for me, for me, it's not a case of Dominic Calvert-Lewin being, if we can, obviously we don't want him to be injured as much, but if the programme, which obviously the manager's called it, if the programme means that he's playing a couple of games, then maybe missing a third game, it might give him that opportunity to play every third game or and keep that consistent way of playing, as you said there. Maupai's not a bad player. He was just a bad signing for me. I don't want to go over the top about him. I just think he's just a bad signing. He doesn't fit that mould of style of play, which, obviously Everton are Dyche as such. He's a defensive manager, and sometimes he likes his players a little bit more tucked in. Having someone up front who can keep hold of the ball and then allow those players to join in the play is a massive part of that, where obviously Maupay likes to get hold of it, try and drop in. It just doesn't suit us, and we've seen a bit of that so far in pre-season. So I just think it's important to bring talented players in, and I know people don't like to hear it, sell on and all this kind of things, but we have to be realistic about not where we are as a football club, but where the majority of teams are in the Premier League right now. Certainly with the money that's flowing in from the Champions League, from the change of the Champions League next season, from the clubs getting money coming in from Saudi. There's very much an us and them now, and we're very much in the camp that hasn't got the money. So you have to have talented players that in 2 or 3 years you can look to sell on.
That's it. I think Everton are in a situation where the only way they can make genuine progress is through sustainable means, and that's by having a long-term image. That might be a case of a couple of years of buying a player for £20 million, thinking, well, we might be able to sell him for 50 in a couple of years. But that's how you see kind of other clubs trying to do it. Atalanta have done it a lot over the last few years. Obviously, they've sold Højlund to Man United. Now they're bringing in Traore, looking at Scamacca and a couple of others. By investing in that one player, if it pays off, what it helps you to do is raise the ceiling of the rest of the squad around it when those players move on. And I think that's an approach that makes a lot of sense for Everton where they are at this stage.
Definitely. What would you like to see then, obviously, in the next couple of weeks? Because I do think it's going to be a mad few weeks. I look at a lot of the big teams now have brought in their top talents, which means they'll start to look to release players. There's still a hell of a lot of good free transfers available, I think, as well. So where do you think we need to strengthen, and where can you imagine they will strengthen in the next few weeks? I think
the reality is they probably need to strengthen in more areas than they're going to be able to. Yeah. I think if we're honest looking at that situation, probably not getting to an ideal Dyche squad by the end of August. Chimiti helps, but I do think that Everton probably need another centre forward as well. We can probably have a different profile of a forward, but at least somebody with a bit of Premier League experience, someone that kind of almost operates in between Chimiti and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So Dominic Calvert-Lewin is obviously if Dominic Calvert-Lewin plays 32 games this season, Everton have a reasonable chance of finishing mid-table. He's that much of a game changer for this squad. We know from the last 2 seasons that it's a gamble to expect that. You can't expect that. Obviously, Chimiti will help to fill in some of those gaps, but we've got to remember that he's young and inexperienced. Obviously, he only broke into the sporting side earlier on this year, so we don't want to seek to reduce the immense pressure on Dominic Calvert-Lewin by putting too much pressure on somebody else. That's not how it works. There needs to be someone that can kind of almost help level it off in the middle. A bit of Premier League experience, someone that can work within the squad, within a Dyche setup, and help to provide goals from another source. I really think they need a right winger. And we know that's somewhere that Everton are looking at. Obviously, Kamaldeen Sulemana being one of them. Willie Gnonto, I know he's played on the left a lot for Leeds, but if you've got him into the squad, what other players might be able to do and where they may be able to play is obviously a knock-on effect. And they were looking at Elanga as well. Obviously, didn't get that over the line. So I think a right winger as well. I think those are the priority bits, because I think there's enough within that squad for Dyche to work with from a defensive point of view. I'm not saying it's ideal.
Yeah.
I think in an ideal world, you probably bring in an ideal world, you probably bring another centre midfielder, another centre back, and another goalkeeper. I think Everton will, despite the lessons of the last 2 years being, don't gamble on players being fit and not having a backup of certain areas. I think Everton will have to take that risk in some positions this season, and it's a case of identifying which ones you feel most comfortable taking. It may well be that in that case, you don't replace Begovic and Virginia steps up, and rather than maybe the ideal plan might have been to have Begovic for one more year to bring Virginia in as third choice and help him grow into the number 2 role for next season. It may well be that he makes that step up this season, but he's had a good pre-season, and obviously he is, as far as Everton's options, certainly within the squad, he's the most experienced number 2 option that they've got. And as we've seen from Jean-Luc Laban and Harry Tyrer going out on loan.
Yeah, and obviously, well, we probably need another goalie to put on the bench, to be fair. So have maybe a third one. No, you're absolutely right. I think the fans are, from listening to them, obviously a striker's a must. We've had Iheanacho, obviously, has been linked with us massively, and Che Adams as well is another one. Both of them, I think, have started obviously with their clubs in the Championship. If you get either of them at a decent price, but it's getting them for a decent price, isn't it?
That's it. I think Adams is probably someone that would adapt to the way in which Everton play better. Iheanacho, I like Iheanacho, but I also think that in the same way they've got to be very careful they don't make the same approach I don't want to use the word mistakes, but obviously things haven't worked out in the way that everybody would hope they would with Mopé.
Yeah.
So I think if you're going to bring in a player that plays best in a different kind of way, there has to be a plan around how to use him. So, if Ian actually came for the door, I'd be happy, but only if there is a plan for that, rather than a case of, my fear has been that they'd get to this stage of the window and all of a sudden they'd go to panic stations and it become not, can we get a striker that fits this system, but can we get any striker? And what fills me with a little bit of confidence with the Chermiti deal is the fact that it almost seems that they haven't panicked. What they've gone is they've gone for somebody, obviously he's a prospect, he's a starlet, he's a teen with not many games under his belt, but what he isn't a massive diversion away from the best way that Everton can play football at this current time with this current squad.
Certainly after missing out on Traore as well.
Yeah, that was obviously, I think, it was a strange one, Traore, because I know there was a lot of noise about how close Everton got, but I mean, from having followed it from the beginning of July onwards, it never really looked like it was going to get over the line. I think there was a lot of talking at the other end of the deal.
Yeah,
Almeria from the outset were very, very clearly a club that were looking to, basically create a market for their player, because their model very much is based, or this summer is based very much around, can they make the money to then fund a wider rebuild, because they only just survived in the Liga last season. So I think had Atalanta not been sniffing around, or had Atalanta not had the Hoyland money increasingly likely to come in at the time, then if Everton had a clean run at that deal, I think it would have got over the line. Yeah. But once, and this is the problem that Everton have got with pretty much anybody at the minute, once it becomes a competition as to how they can do it, they haven't quite got the resources to commit to win that battle with a lot of clubs. I suppose
that's where they have to choose the targets carefully, isn't it? And be quick about doing the deal as well, trying to get it over the line as quick as possible, so not attract that other interest as well, and see if they can get these players over. So let's just talk about the players we have got in for a moment. So Dan Juma, what role do you expect he'll take this season? Because obviously plays off the left. He's scored, I think, the most amount of goals from the left. But as a centre forward, his ratio for scoring is actually better from playing off the left. So do you think he can actually fill in all three positions?
I think potentially. I think the one thing that Danjuma can't do this season is be the Dominic Calvert-Lewin backup.
Yeah.
They can't play 4-5-1, 4-4-1-1, which are Dyche's favoured formations, and have Danjuma in that, that top role that Dominic Calvert-Lewin plays in, because we saw it against, albeit briefly, we saw it against Stoke. He isn't that player. He's not going to win headers against 6 foot whatever centre backs on the halfway line, and there's only so much that he can do in terms of running the channels to relieve the pressure. So that won't, if he's a spearhead, that won't work. Now he could be effective off the left wing. That's a role that does exist for him within the squad. The question there would be, to what extent does that limit Dwight McNeil's effectiveness? Because that's the position that he had. And the second half of last season, it was probably a toss-up between him and Dwight and Abdoulaye Doucouré as to who was the best player in that Everton survival run. Yeah. Obviously, he finished the top goal scorer for the club in the campaign. And I think McNeil's performance away at Brighton was probably the best individual performance of an Everton player last season, maybe the only competition being Pickford against Liverpool in the derby at Goodison, which he was a 10 out of 10 in that game. So I like the idea of Danjuma playing as a support striker, effectively playing off Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So, that might help Everton keep more bodies in the centre midfield as well. And I think that's where he could be at his strongest. So, you can have Dwight McNeil off the left wing, ideally have a specialist right winger off the right wing, or right of midfield as it would be in those circumstances, and have Danjuma almost filling in that gap that, Abdoulaye Doucouré did a lot of the 30 yards out, bursting into the box kind of thing last, and it's a great effectiveness at the back end of last season. But maybe having Danjuma as the player that's there to bounce off Dominic Calvert-Lewin, to pick up the loose balls that he wins, from to play off, from to play in, the wide players as they're going forward, and as a goal threat as well. I think that's what I'd like to see.
It's just hard to envisage an Everton team with only 2 midfield, though. That is the worry.
Of course it is. And I think what probably actually ends up happening is, if that was to be a route that Dyche was to go down, I think you'd end up seeing almost a flat 4 rather than a one with wingers. And I think that's probably where Dwight McNeil and Alex Iwobi retain their positions. In the sense that obviously they both do a lot of defensive work, as we saw at the back end of last season. So for that to kind of be the approach, obviously, for what you gain in having someone up there around Dominic Calvert-Lewin, this Evans side has to kind of make adjustments elsewhere. But hopefully what that would do is it would create a more effective route to goal. And in fairness to Dyche, she got Everton in the opposition box a hell of a lot more in the back end of last season. Obviously, the problem, as it has been for some time, was making the most of the chances they did get rather than necessarily creating chances in the first place. I mean, I really like Alex Iwobi in the left centre midfield role. I think as a creative player, there weren't a lot of positives to take from that first half of the season under Lampard. And obviously, Iwobi ended up there essentially because of the injury crisis that Everton started the season with in centre midfield. But for him to have created the number of assists and goal involvements that he had before the World Cup break, bearing in mind for so long of that he didn't have a fit Dominic Calvert-Lewin playing alongside him, and he was in a largely dysfunctional side, I think is really impressive. And I like having someone like him and his intelligence there. But again, the problem is, if you then take him off the right midfield, who goes there, and also who do you take out of centre midfield? And there's a quid pro quo for everything, isn't there?
It doesn't quite feel like there's a formation that suits all of our players.
No, that's definitely...
You've got the likes of James Garner, who could, like you mentioned before, he could play on, when we have seen him, he's played on the right-hand side. Obviously, he's going to tuck in and allow Patterson or Coleman to go on the outside of him. Dwight McNeil could play on the right-hand side, but then he's coming inside. They're just, Iwobi, as you said, should be playing down the centre in an ideal scenario. That's what his skill set is. But then you've got these 2 midfielders that you don't feel like you've got 2 that you can really rely on. Unless, of course, Onana really steps up this season and becomes a player who can get all over the pitch. But it just feels like we've got a lot of players, but no real...
It does, and that's a real issue. And I think, to be honest, it's probably something that... it's existed for a while, but it's not really something I don't think everyone can properly address until next summer. Next summer's the big summer when a lot of the big contracts end, and there's probably a little bit more movement around. And
stadiums on the
horizon. Another big negative year will drop off the financial fair play rolling system. That's the summer that you would think that Kevin Fowler could really do something with this squad. At the moment, it's step by step. I mean, one of my favourite passages of play from this summer so far has been I think it was against Wigan. I know it's only against Wigan, and Wigan caused Everton trouble. Like, I mean, Stephen Humphreys down the right caused problems down Everton's left. But what I liked in that game, obviously, Ashley Young played left winger, and Alex Iwobi's left centre midfield, and the interactions between them, the way that Young could pick Iwobi out there, the way they linked up together, the way they fed each other, it just kind of was a reminder of the intelligence that Iwobi has and what you can bring out of him if he has other intelligent footballers around him. I don't think we've seen enough of that. Whether or not we'd be able to this season, I don't know. But if you had Young at left back, Danjuma left wing, and Iwobi effectively in between them. Yeah. I'd like how Everton would look down that left-hand side.
Do you expect Young to start at left back? Because, obviously Mykolenko's only just come back. He looked quite rusty on Saturday. The amount of times he let the winger skip inside him. But you can put that down to rust. He's only just come back. So.
And Sporting are a very good attacking unit as well. I mean, I took positives from the Sporting performance from Everton, but Everton should have been behind in the first half an hour. Yeah. They should have been 1 or 2 nil down. And I also think as well, for everything that we said about transfers and stuff like that, although he didn't score, you looked at Victor Gyökeres and you think, I don't quite know what it was that stopped Everton from quite trying to get that over the line last summer, because he looked like he could do a lot of things that, I mean, we talk about trying to find someone that could either complement or challenge Dominic Calvert-Lewin, and Gyökeres looked like he was. But
like you said before, if you've got another club competing, who can pay 20?
Well, obviously that being the case this summer, but last summer,
true.
There was an opportunity there for Everton. Obviously, Coventry at that point, I think it might have been newly promoted at that point. There would have been far greater opportunity for a deal there than there clearly was come January, when Coventry, like Blackburn with Diaz, were looking at it and thinking, well, we could sell these players now, or both of them on a promotion hunt, and that's worth far more money for them, so it's worth keeping hold of them, wasn't it? So I think actually I'm probably going to start left back. I think Mykolenko, obviously, he's played 245 minutes now.
Do you think that one of the reasons, and you sort of touched on this before, is the lack of Seamus Coleman obviously not being around at the moment, and also. We don't. I mean, I love Seamus, but I want Patterson starting right back. I want him. He's not the finished product by any means. Do you think Ashley Young gives you that experience, that leadership? He's been there. He's won things as well. I mean, I was as close to him, and you were as close to him at Wigan when we spoke to him after the game. He looks fit as a fiddle.
He did, didn't he? Yeah, we both there, weren't we?
Fantastic. And I just thought, well, 38. This fella looks.
I enjoyed the way he brushed off the gaffer's day as well. He's like. When I asked him if it was the hardest experience of a pre-season that he's had, and he was like, well, it was hard, but Conte was a bit different.
Conte in Italy was a little bit more difficult. But do you think he fills that role of having that little bit of leadership?
Yeah, I can definitely see what you're saying there.
Because the other reason is as well, the centre backs, which a lot of our fans want a centre back this summer. Mm-hmm. Branthwaite could be one of the starting ones, and if you've got Patterson. You've got Branthwaite, obviously Tarkowski in there, and you need that little bit of. I think you might need that little bit of experience in there as well. And Young obviously gives you that.
Absolutely, I think the way in which he reads the game as well is just crucial. I think he brings a lot of things to the table Everton didn't have last season. I've already mentioned it. I don't want to keep repeating myself, but the intelligence that he has, first and foremost, he's more than happy to take possession, facing his own goal in tight situations. And as we've seen a few times over pre-season, you put the right players around him, he can play his way out of that trouble. Yeah. If he can't find a way, I've seen this so many times already in these few games. I appreciate they're only friendlies, but he's very adept at winning that free kick, going down when he feels the contact, and all of a sudden Everton are in a situation where they're 30 yards up the pitch with possession and they've got a free kick, as opposed to scrambling around, on the edge of their own box and under pressure. But he also carries the ball really well, and that's something that we just didn't see from Everton at all last. It's one of the reasons that I think Lewis Dobbin has been such a breath of fresh air this summer. Am I saying that Lewis Dobbin's going to have a big role to play in Everton's Premier League season this season? Probably not. But I think if you'd have said to anybody which of the academy prospects is going to have the best pre-season, I don't think many people would have picked Lewis Dobbin, including myself. And one of the things that I've liked about both Young and Dobbin when they've been on the left is how they've picked up the ball and they've been willing to be direct and run at people, and both go both ways. They'll go to the byline and put a cross in, or they can cut inside and have a shot. And just that was missing so much of last season. Just that idea that there's a bit of intelligence a bit further down the pitch, and also greater threat going forward as well. Young also, he's good on his set pieces. No,
Dobbin's definitely, I mean, he's given himself a chance at least, hasn't he? He's played himself into almost like the need to buy a player for him to be maybe sent somewhere else on loan, where we've already seen players leave on loan who fans, you know, I've got big hopes for, you know, Mills and Warrington, where people look at them and think, they could be part of it. I mean, after the Bolton game, I think the manager clearly made his mind, or maybe he'd made his mind up already, and that might have been the last chance for him to catch it. But at least with Dobbin, his performances so far, I've said to the manager, well, I at least can stick around till you find someone to replace me, and if you don't, then maybe I can be a part of this for the rest of the season.
Yeah, that's it. I think pretty much every Everton fan wants to support a club where there's an opportunity and a system for the likes of Dobbin, Warrington, Mills, Cannon, etc. to come into the first team and grow into a more senior role. Sadly, Everton aren't in that position at the moment. They haven't been for a couple of years. There haven't been pressure-free minutes apart from perhaps some of the more difficult games where Everton were, you know, well behind going into the last stage, and as a result would have been difficult environments to come onto. Albeit Isaac Price came on when Everton were well behind against Brighton back in January. But there haven't been those. You know, you look back to obviously the most famous example, you know, Alex Ferguson's class of '92. Well, it's a lot easier to bring young players you give them experience when you're 3-0 up, 2-0 up with 15 minutes to go all the time. Everton aren't in that situation. No. Are they going to be in that situation this season? Hopefully, but I very much doubt it. So I would have liked to have seen those players hang around a little bit longer. I'd have liked to, in the same way that Frank Lampard kept them around the squad until the very end of the transfer window last summer, and then made an evaluation once he knew who was coming in. I would have preferred that to have been the case this summer, because I still think that there are holes in the squad that could be filled. And am I saying that some of these young players can necessarily fill them? I don't know, but I like the idea of giving them a chance. And they're not going to get that chance, but at least by going out on loan, they still have the opportunity to further their development. So
it's an interesting one. And just leading on from the point about Ashley Young is obviously the change in captaincy as well. That's been interesting as well, because obviously, I mean, Seamus Coleman is the club captain, we all know that, but obviously he's going to have less opportunities. We hope, again, obviously, he'll be battling with Patterson, and if he takes it off Patterson, fair play to him, and it wouldn't surprise me with Seamus. But obviously going from Jordan Pickford to James Tarkowski, that's interesting, because actually, in the last few years, that's not something we've seen massively happen at Everton. It's been, obviously, Seamus has been the captain, and new managers have come in, and they've typically just stuck to carrying on as normal. But Sean Dyche, I think, has maybe, you know, set an example here and said, no, I'm having my man. Yeah, clearly. I think, you know, Tarkowski's clearly a very prominent voice in that dressing room and on that pitch, and we know that Dyche trusts him because he knows him. He wasn't Dyche's captain at Burnley. That was Ben Mee. You know, he did have the armband from time to time, but it was Ben Mee that had that job at Burnley under Dyche. So I'm a little bit surprised, because, you know, it's a role that I know Pickford was very, very proud to have, and, you know, it's difficult to say that he's done a bad job at it necessarily, or it certainly hasn't impacted his performances. Because if you look at the last 18 months, certainly throughout all of last season, the second half of the season that ended in the the Crystal Palace survival win, Pickford kept Everton in those relegation battles. He has played a big part of keeping Everton in the Premier League over those two seasons, and I think that when he signed his contract in back end of January, beginning of February, I think that it was a massive credibility boost within the dressing room for Sean Dyche, because obviously Pickford, you've got someone there who is an England #1 international, who's played latter stages of World Cups, European Championships final. You could completely understand why he might be looking elsewhere to see it as a move to play at a level Everton can't give him at the moment. So when he signed that contract, obviously he's happy at Everton. There might have been a degree of pragmatism as well, but he, from all accounts, he is happy at Everton. He loves the club and he likes being around here. So I thought
it was a bit of a surprise to see him have the vice captaincy essentially taken off him following that, because it was a useful thing for Sean Dyche coming in to have one of the biggest characters in the dressing room kind of give him that, that bit of momentum, which alongside the Arsenal win really did help Everton during that difficult period. But I don't think anyone's particularly surprised by Tarkowski being someone that the manager feels he can trust. And we know that quite often there are a lot of managers where it's not necessarily a personal thing, but they like to have their captain further up the pitch as opposed to in goal, because of the different type of influence they can have. And I think if you take the emotions out of it, then perhaps that might be another one of the reasons for it. But I don't think Everton are necessarily worse off for having Tarkowski with the armband when Coleman isn't there. So he fought hard for Everton last season, didn't
absolutely.
he? And will do so again, hopefully.
Hopefully starts. I just wonder whether it was not a power move as such by Dyche. He's the manager of the club, but I think in a way it's almost like he's his version of the.
I can see
they often
that.
say the manager on the pitch, don't they?
I think probably Dyche is in a situation where he didn't need to make power moves by this summer. I think most of the players that were there from late January, from when he came in late January, I think the message would have been received loud and clear already as to who it is that holds the power in Finch Farm. So. Yeah.
Especially after Gaffer's Day, No, it's just an interesting one.
Yeah, it is.
So have you obviously Everton have been unbeaten in the friendly. So have you taken much out of them, or has it been hard to take anything out of them just because of the disjointed nature of them? Obviously, Dan Juma only played against Stoke for 45 minutes. He did play in the behind closed door ones against Monza. Dominic Calvert-Lewin hasn't played much in them. We were both at Wigan, and it felt like that team picked itself and probably told each other where they were going to play that day. It was 11 players and a load of 18-year-olds on the bench that the manager didn't want to bring on. So is it being hard to try and get an idea of what he wants to do this season?
Not necessarily. I think it's clear for a start that he wants to play four at the back. It's going to be a 4-5-1 or a 4-4-1-1. That looks pretty obvious, which we already knew. There's been a few insights that I think probably been able to glean, in particular, the João Virginia number 2 question. João Virginia's played a lot of minutes in front of Sean Dyche, including when Dyche was at Tranmere while we were at we're at Wigan. So it looks like we can say with a degree of confidence that at the very least, Sean Dyche's done everything he can to look at Virginia and see whether or not he feels comfortable with him as backup goalkeeper. He's had that chance. We'll see where that takes us in the next few weeks. But you wouldn't put number two as a top priority for Everton quite at this stage. I don't think so. I've been pleased with Nathan Patterson because obviously there are so many players within the squad that we have questions about fitness. Patterson is somebody that's had a real misfortune with his injuries over the 18 months or so that he's been an Everton player. I know that during the off season he spent a lot of time at Finch Farm working really, really hard to try and, in a similar way to Dom, kind of build back in a more sustainable manner. Build more resilience, I suppose, into his body, and he's looked quite good. We know he's still raw. We're not going to, I don't think we should be naive about it. But he started last season really well, and it was a shame because the injuries then started to kind of disrupt his season.
Just growing into it, wasn't he?
He was just growing into it. So I'd like to. He's had a good pre-season foundation this summer, so hopefully that'll come forward. I think the reality is that probably. I think he probably seems to see Alex Iwobi as a wide player at the moment. That's probably a degree of, trying to create the best squad rather than trying to get the best out of every single individual. So have learned a lot that I didn't know already. Not a huge amount. Some of these lineups have been experimental. I think probably, if we're being perfectly honest, some of the more interesting insights that we've been getting is by who hasn't been there rather than who has been there. Obviously we'll have all seen that Mason Holgate hasn't really had any involvements. There's interest in him from elsewhere, and obviously unlike Jared Branthwaite and James Garner who came back from international duty and have come straight into the setup. We haven't seen anything of Damari Gray since who had a good Gold Cup with Jamaica. Did really well with them. So I think we can probably see which way both of those situations are going. I've liked Branthwaite when he's come in. Probably probably still think his favourite partnership is Keane and Tarkowski out of what
he's
got.
That's quite an interesting one.
But Branthwaite has done a lot to kind of make him, to put himself in that conversation more so than I perhaps necessarily expected him to. Like he certainly against second half against Lisbon, he's been proactively good as opposed to just coming in and doing the job. He's been impressive. So it's clear that he's a different player to the one that we last saw at Goodison Park getting sent off against Ivan Toney, where for all we want to talk about, it probably should have been a penalty for Richarlison to build up to that goal. I don't think anyone could argue that once you don't give that penalty, it was clearly a red card. We got out-fought and out-muscled by Ivan Toney, and it was quite a clumsy foul. I think Everton have a player who's a bit more mature now, and hopefully someone that we'll see get a good showing this season.
Yeah, that's interesting because obviously Ben Godfrey started on Saturday. Branthwaite came on a half time. Keane only came on because Taki got the injury. So that's interesting. I think a lot of fans want to see Branthwaite finally get that opportunity.
Yeah.
He for me, he just seems a bit light for the Premier League at the moment. But I want him given the chance because I just look at the other two. Michael Keane is Michael Keane. He's steady in his own way. He never gets injured. You can always call on him, and certainly for certain games, he's the right man to put next to James Tarkowski. The problem is there's a lot of games like we saw in the Leicester game, which obviously is the last time he played in the Premier League, where pace and mobility can leave him looking average. Ben Godfrey, I am being told relentlessly, people feel like he's lost pace.
Yeah.
So I again, that can be because maybe it's pre-season and he's not quite up to the levels. I'm not sure, but I think certainly with Branthwaite, there is just that optimism, isn't it? A young player, we all want him to do well. He did well last season. We know what the other two can give us. So why not start and give this lad, very much like in the John Stones mould, I think, give this lad an opportunity next to someone who, in James Tarkowski, is the leader of the team now, had a fantastic first season. Let him make his mistakes, I suppose. Can Everton afford for him to make those mistakes, though? That's probably the question.
Yeah, and I don't know if they can at this stage, to be perfectly honest. I think they have to almost play the safe bet with each one. I think with Michael Keane, I understand that there are a lot of people that probably, have their, there are a lot of critics of him. I think one thing in Michael Keane's defence would be that, although obviously Sean Dyche sought to bring him in from an early stage of after his appointment in earlier on this year, Keane has been unfortunate from the fact that a lot of the time that he's been involved in this Everton starting lineup has been when there's been an absolute mess of a situation at fullback. The archetypal kind of negative highlight for Keane is putting the ball into the back of his own net from 6-8 yards, isn't it? Well, obviously we've seen that a fair few occasions, but probably it would only be fair to Keane to look at how he's ended up in that situation in the first place. More often than not, it's because opposition wingers have got to the byline too easily, and have put Michael Keane in a situation where he's facing his own goal 8 yards out, and he's got a ball flashing across him, and a striker on his left shoulder, and trying to work out what to do. And because you look at that when he came into the team at earlier on this year, it's during that kind of. I think Dyche has got a lot of things right, and he deserves a lot of credit for the way in which he's kept Everton up. But I'm still slightly confused by the whole Mason Holgate as a fullback, Ben Godfrey as a right back experiment, which was around the same time that Keane kind of came into the side. So I do think he deserves for that context to at least being given when people analyse where his position is within this squad. I suppose. Probably throw it back to you. Question is, obviously we know about Branthwaite, his inexperience, although we also know about the clear potential he has. He clearly does, and obviously nurturing that is the priority. How do Everton get the best out of Jared Branthwaite whilst he's an Everton player? Is that throwing him in at the deep end now, or is that kind of gradually bringing him in? Fulham obviously are a squad that have got a lot of, they've got their own issues at the moment, and Mitrovic, the star man, is one of them. I mean, if it gets to a point next Saturday where Mitrovic is starting for Fulham, who would you rather at centre back?
Or Jimenez though as well, isn't he? If Jimenez starts for Fulham, he's another one.
Yeah.
So he's another player who will give him To me, it's. I don't think there's a clear solution. Just because.
No, I agree with that.
Because
I don't think there's an easy answer to this.
Because Keane has got his own issues, but you would fancy him actually physically. But then, and Ben Godfrey he's a conundrum. He really is a conundrum because he's got all the attributes. He just still lacks that. I don't know. He lacks something as a centre back. Like, he doesn't. I always say, like, good defenders almost smell the danger before it happens. They know where to be before. He relies on the pace to get him there after it's happened. And I find that as a centre back, I find that a worrying trait because that pace is not always going to be there. So how long can you maintain that? I think centre-backs are always better when they're already in the position because pace, if they've got pace, that's another bonus. But if they're already aware, and I think that's something better. I don't think his positioning is always been a little bit off.
It's an interesting one with Ben, isn't it? Because, on the flip side, you then look to the draw Everton got at the Etihad last Christmas, and they played him centre-back in a back five, essentially. I know Erling Haaland scored in that game, but Ben Godfrey did as good a job on him in that match that I've seen anyone do on Haaland last. I saw anyone do on Haaland last, and admittedly not having forensically watched every Man City game, but and albeit a degree of that was less probably about football and more about the personal battle that he allowed Haaland to get drawn into. Really, I keep saying this when people, Haaland shouldn't have been on the pitch. No. I'm still amazed he didn't get a straight red for the foul on Mikalenko because of someone it was right in front of us, and you could see, it's not so much that the tackle itself was particularly, was really dangerous. It was more the intent. You could see that he was fired up, and as Mikalenko's got his on the touchline picking the ball, got his back to Haaland, you can see what Haaland's going to do from 20 yards away, and he flies in off the ground. But still, obviously, I haven't got a point from that game. But that shows you what Godfrey can do. So, a little bit like the point that you were making earlier with perhaps some of Everton's midfielders, there are a lot of kind of players here that we know have got positive attributes, and we know in the right formation, with the right players around them, could be part of a competitive Premier League side. It's just trying to build that squad, and it feels like Everton almost have 2/3 of a plan. Well, they have a plan A, and that plan A is Dominic Calvert-Lewin up top, and then it feels like they have kind of 2/3 of a plan B and 2/3 of a plan C and 2/3 of a plan C, but they can't quite muster the solutions out of what they've got. For every player that plays in their best position, someone else plays out of position, which is just the nature of the kind of Frankenstein squad they've got at the moment. So
it's really difficult to ask you this question because even though the season starts this week, we know because of the transfer window, it's really hard to know where Everton are going to be in a couple of weeks. But in reality, what do you envisage for Everton this season?
It's difficult. It's difficult. Obviously, that doesn't get me out of having to give an opinion. I think there are a number of factors which might help Everton this season that didn't help them last season. I think the league might be weaker. Yeah. Now, we all made the mistake of a shoot. I say made the mistake. Obviously, Scott Parker, as Bournemouth boss, was coming out in public and saying the squad weren't good enough at the beginning of last season. But the beginning of last season, Bournemouth didn't look competitive. Nottingham Forest looked a mess, and there were a few unknown quantities. Now, as it happened, it ended up there were no. I'm not going to say that it was a particularly high standard in the Premier League, but there were clearly a lot of teams around the bottom 6 or 7 of a very similar ability. And you didn't get what you often get without one or two teams drop completely away. Now, I haven't looked that closely, but it feels like there might be a couple of clubs that could potentially do that this season. Obviously, Sheffield United have lost their goal scorer. Luton are coming up, and it'll be interesting to see whether they, and also Sheffield United to a certain extent, although they're almost a phase further along in their evolution, whether or not Luton come up with the idea of let's try and stay in the Premier League, or let's take as much money from the Premier League as we can to then go down and build a more sustainable route back into consolidating as a Premier League outfit. But that might both help Everton. Wolves are clearly in a slightly tricky scenario. West Ham are as well. There are a couple of squads that haven't really improved that much. So that might help. I think that the thing that has me most positive for Everton this season is I don't think that there is any naivety at Finch Farm as to the challenge that lies ahead. I think when you look back to this time last summer, I think that there was an attitude. And it wasn't an attitude of complacency, but I think that there was a belief that the squad was better than it was. And if I'm perfectly honest, I felt this too. I coming out of the season that ended in the Crystal Palace, survival, Lampard, and the positivity that was flowing from that. I think there were a lot of people in the club and outside the club that looked at that squad and thought, you know what, if you take it out of that toxic context that it got embroiled in the back end of that season, and you take it out of that relegation death spiral that it was in, and you give the players a psychological break and a physical break so you don't have, because they did have a lot of bad injuries. And they did have a lot of bad luck at the back end of that season as well. I was one of the people that probably thought that you got that squad, you gave it a break, you got the players back to fitness, and it's probably 5 or 6 points naturally 5 or 6 points better off than it was, and therefore that avoids you getting a relegation. But then you look at some of the signings, and it appeared to be a plan. You look at Dominic Calvert-Lewin, looked really good he looked good he looked fit in pre-season. So there was a degree of positivity. Also, we know how it unfolded. Obviously, that naive, that optimism was misplaced, as I say, including from me. I think one thing where Everton approached this season stronger than last season is I think that Sean Dyche will have them on a war footing from the moment that first ball is kicked. They'll be in no doubt that priority number one is to stay in the Premier League, that they are in a fight, that they are in a relegation battle, and it's up to them to push themselves away from it rather than just do their own thing and hope that they don't fall into trouble. Number one plan will be do everything it takes to not go down. And then if that ends up in a situation where you get to, March, April of next season and all of a sudden everyone's positively surprised in the 13th, 14th, and it doesn't look like they're going to be in a relegation battle, well, that's the bonus. Hopefully that is the situation, because then they'll be able to do what Kevin Farwell, Dan Purdy haven't been able to do for the last 2 seasons, and that is actually get a head start on the transfer window. Not knowing what league I know they have contingency plans and things like that, but obviously it makes a hell of a difference starting your transfer window in Easter after the last game of the season, where you can go, oh, thank goodness for that. Like we're safe. Put them on a massive back foot. Put them on the back foot this summer. So I'm do I think that Everton are going to set the world alight? No. Do I think it's can I guarantee they're not going to be in a relegation battle? No. Do I have nerves around the squad? Yes, I do. But do I think that they'll at least be starting this in the right frame of mind? And do I think that they have a manager that is probably very good at setting a side up for that? Yes. They need some more players desperately. Hopefully they will get them. It just becomes a very different conversation on the 1st of September if nobody else has come in. But I'm trying my best to be positive, and as I say, that the big positive I can take is, I think the mentality be right straight from the start, and what Everton might lack in ability, they might make up for it a little bit in mentality, and hopefully that will at least kind of prepare them better for what could be a difficult season again. I absolutely agree with you, because I think there was an idea 12 months ago that after being out in America and watching them, I'll be honest, I wasn't looking forward to it because of the goal scoring side of things. But there was an idea that we were going to evolve, and Frank Lampard's football and playing out from the back was going to evolve into something better, and the schedule as well, having 5-6 games before the window shut as well didn't help. With such a small squad, not having a centre forward when Dom got injured. It all played its part, and then obviously you mentioned the relegated teams coming up. They all got that nice break for the World Cup to reset. Clubs won't get that this year, so I think it will be. And you're right, we start from the idea. I think the other side of it was I think there was a feeling last summer everyone was caught up in this Frank Lampard going to get sacked first. Let's prove them wrong. And I think Sean Dyche is very much of like, I know where we're starting, and I know where we're trying to get to. And there's a realism about what he's trying to do. And what we ended up last season was a manager trying to play survival football who wasn't capable of playing survival football. So therefore we went out and brought the fella in who understood it completely. And I think that will help. That's it. Like, I think Everton didn't start last season. It took them a long time to get their first win, but there were positives that you could take from a lot of those performances. I remember being, obviously it was early in the season, but the 0-0, the Goodison derby, Everton genuinely went toe-to-toe with that Liverpool side at the time. And at that time, I don't think we or many people quite realised the drop-off that Liverpool had from the season before, where they got, they played every single game and nearly won all 4 trophies. Obviously, there was a drop-off in quality from them, which hadn't really come to the fore then. But remember looking at that and thinking, they did well. I remember going, went to Leeds, didn't we, last game before the end of the transfer window, and Lampard moved from the back 5 to the back 4, and Leeds were in good form at the time and didn't tear Everton apart. It was like, maybe we. But I do think that there was probably a degree of thought we were one step further ahead in the transition towards a mid-table side than they were, and perhaps kind of tried to run before they could walk. And I, as I say, I myself look back and have to put my hands up and say I thought Everton were better than they were going into that season. The big problem, and you were there as well, we were both there in Minnesota when Adrian Heath's team just absolutely tore Everton apart. I think that was a you're hitting the earth and going, oh, wait a minute, things aren't just going to naturally get better here. There is a lot of a mess within this squad and this group of players. But then Lampard came out, mentioned relegation back then. But what did happen after that was, they didn't go and sign a striker. They did bring in a few players after that. You thought, all right, maybe it's going to... Obviously, it didn't. There's an alternative universe somewhere where Everton just had a lovely season last year, where Lampard led them to, 11th, and everyone just had 12 months of, Cody and Tarkowski, the dads having Everton being the club that everyone wanted to be around and things like that. But unfortunately, things didn't turn out that way.
There's an alternative world where we just sold Anthony Gordon to Chelsea. And we just used the money and brought in a couple of strikers, which is what should have probably happened if, again, they got
2 bites of that.
Not me, but
it didn't do it.
Exactly. Maybe if they'd done it in last summer, they would have been able to get some better players in who would have got us away from that area, but we didn't. But no, I think we all know it's going to be tough this season. But like you saying, then something like 5-6 extra points. Look at the home form. The home form was abysmal. There's no... you just hope Everton can't have as bad a season. The away form, you imagine, can only get better because we will be in games because we're going to be a little bit tougher. If Everton got 9 more points, 3 more wins, that does get you to 11th place, 12th place, whatever. And like you said, if you're around that area in Easter and suddenly everyone goes... It's not been a great season, but at least we're not going to the final day. Like you said, plans can be put in place. And you know what? They're not even saying like transfer ones as well. They're things like maybe it'll be us who goes on that nice tour to America with the Premier League and we earn extra money from that. And there's
get extra money from finishing higher up the league. All of a sudden there's, I think, and I think there's I think there is a bit of a sense within the dressing room Finch Farm at Goodison Park or whatever at the minute that Everton aren't a million miles away from being a project that players can and want to buy into. We know it's a fabulous club. We know it's got a wonderful fan base. We know it's got a rich history. We know that it's got, it's a club that's very fortunate to have more about it than, a lot of others. It is, it's one of the biggest football clubs in the world. Like it is.
Why people keep... When it's on relegation, people talk about us.
That's why Everton are a story no matter what they're doing, because they are a big club. And I think that what Everton have failed to do recently, sadly, is they failed to harness the potential that they've got both as a football club and as an institution and direct that into a positive fashion and get the forward momentum going. I don't think they're far off being able to do that. They've just got to get the basic things right on and off the pitch. That means changes on and off the pitch and changes of approach to certain things. But there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it is visible. That doesn't mean to say Everton will get there.
No.
Football is such a fickle and precarious business, and the first 6 weeks of this season are absolutely huge because if Everton have an opportunity with the way the fixture list is to kind of get a head start on the season, and if they don't take that, if we end up in a situation where the transfer window doesn't play out how most people would hope it do, and the results don't go how they would hope to, you could end up in a situation again where you get to October and that second international break, and and there could be another period of reckoning. But hopefully it won't be. And I say the big positive that I take going into this season is, I don't think there's any naivety at Finch Farm around what the situation is, and I think that Sean Dyche will instill that within the players, within the squad, and as a result of that, hopefully they'll be better prepared for what lies ahead, which will be difficult.
Just fine. I won't talk about. I don't think there's any point talking about Fulham because it's really hard, isn't it? It's really hard to get an idea. It'll just be the first game of the season, and you hope you get 3 points.
I mean, I still have nightmares about a couple of months ago when Fulham last rocked up to Goodison Park, and again, like I say, I think Dyche deserves a lot of credit for what he did with Everton last season. But there were a few kind of head scratches, and the maintenance of the 4-4-2, and I think it was Ben Godfrey at right back that day, and that first half an hour was it was terrible, and so I mean that was a real disappointing day. I'd like to think it couldn't be worse than that. So, but I think it's going to be really interesting. But it's, obviously Dyche will say every game's worth the same. Every game's a big battle and that. But I do think it's a game which is an opportunity for Everton to start the season.
Get off to a good start.
It's not. Some last season it was Chelsea, newly crowned European champions, wasn't it? With who'd already started their massive spending spree, and albeit they were a bit lucky to get past Everton on that first game of the season. Obviously, it was a penalty that did it. But yeah, there is a chance. There's a chance in these fixtures for Everton to start building positive momentum quickly, and if they can do that, then things might start to kind of turn a corner. Yeah,
and just finally, and this time next week we might know more about the projected investment in Everton as well. There was, there's obviously been a lot of talk all summer. That could be a big catalyst as well, couldn't it? Just not necessarily what happens to Everton as a club, but for the fan base as well, to start getting those tangible things in place. The board being the board that takes Everton Football Club forward. The new CEO. If this thing does happen in the next week or so, I think that could give the fans a big boost to say, right, we can start doing things properly now because that's all sorted. The board from last year have left, got a new board in place now. It's the one permanent, and we can move forward with this with a little bit of hope that these people know what they're doing to take Everton forward.
Yeah, well, it's a slow moving process. I think we've seen that already, and I think it's difficult to put time frames on it, and there's still a degree of uncertainty over how things will unfold. I don't think we can second guess too much on that front. But again, like we've spoken about how on the pitch that there is a potential for positive momentum to build. Everton are in a situation where there's a potential, I say underline that word, but it's a potential for things to start to move in a positive direction off the pitch as well. A lot of things still need to happen. And these processes are complex, and the negotiations take time, and lots of different outcomes are still potential. But obviously, it's another area where there might be where there's an opportunity to create positive change. So, that's it, and probably best to see that as a separate thing to the transfer window.
Absolutely.
And at the moment, I said it's still complex and complicated, but. Obviously there'll be movement, and I'm sure that when there is, I'll be more than happy to come back here.
I mean, listen, I'm not putting one with the other. I'm not saying there's going to be money. I just think for the fan base, from what we saw the second half of the season, the unrest, the marches, the protests, it would just be lovely to put all that to bed and be all on the same page as we move forward in a season. That would please me, more than anything in the world, because we saw when Frank Lampard was the manager towards the back end of the season before that, when everyone pulls in the same direction, what a club we could have. And obviously that was pulled apart last season, and I don't think Sean Dyche actually deserves that as a manager. I don't think he walked into that situation. It'd be really nice if everyone was on the same page and we can start a season with a little bit of optimism. So we're not saying, but you know, that little bit of cynicism that all fans have. We all want to be able to say, that stadium's coming along, that's our new board, these are our new CEO or whatever, and let's just have a bit of optimism.
Yeah, Everton's great strength lies in its fan base. That's where the power lies, and there's no doubt whatsoever that Everton as an organisation is so much stronger when, you know, to coin a Sean Dyche phrase, I'm going to have my bingo card there at Finch Farm on Thursday when he's got his press conference. I'll be ticking them off. But, you know, when the club is aligned with the fan base, then, you know, that is a massive boost. It's so much stronger. And hopefully things move to a point where, you know, there's far more harmony on all sides of the spectrum, because at that point, you know, then Everton fans will have a future which hopefully they can genuinely get excited for.
Let's hope so. Joe, fantastic as ever. You can read all Joe's pieces in the Liverpool Echo. What's your Twitter?
Joe_Thomas18.
There you go.
Because
he loves Phil Neville. That's why it was the 18. That's what it was. That's why he took it. You can catch Joe there. There you go. Thank you for watching. See you later.
Thank you.